Good morning and welcome to our virtual audience to the 5th Fearless Conversations event. It's a collaboration between the Advertiser and Flinders University, and it's about being brave in our thinking, about how we drive South Australia forward in the future, and challenge ourselves to position what is a great state for success in the future. There's a series of fearless discussion panels over 13 weeks on a range of topics from high-tech innovation, tourism, infrastructure, education, health and more. And for each we've assembled a great group of thought leaders to pose a series of questions. We want to explore their views on the opportunities and challenges we have in relation to each topic. Today, transport. Feel free to join the conversation through Twitter using the hashtag Fearless Conversations or in the comments section on advertiser.com.au. And questions come in, we'll try and put them to panel members depending on how we go for time. So thanks for joining Fearless Conversations. I'm Matthew Abraham. I'm a columnist with the Advertiser and Sunday Mail, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion and encouraging our guests to be brave and fearless. First, though, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional country of the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains and pay respect to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationships with the land. We acknowledge they are of continuing importance to the Ghana people living today. And we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations. I'd like to introduce our experts today, starting with Karen Redman, Mayor of Gawler. Glad you got a car park.
Yes, I did.
Karen, this morning.
It wasn't easy.
Tony Braxton-Smith, CEO of the Department for Transport and Infrastructure. Glad your bus was on time.
Thank you, Matt.
Tony.
It was.
As they always are. Anne Ferguson, OAM, Mayor of Mount Barker District Council.
Hi, Matt.
Welcome. I don't think you caught the train. There isn't one.
No, I'm coming.
Daniel Gannon, SA Executive Director of the Property Council of Australia. Daniel, you probably had your chauffeur bring you here. And Professor Rocco Zito, who's Head of Engineering at Flinders University and would have caught your driverless bus, but it doesn't start till tomorrow, is that right?
Day after.
Day after tomorrow.
You missed it.
No kangaroos in the way of it anyway.
Matthew.
Let's get into this. I'd like to start, if we can, with the Adelaide Hills, because we've got a growing population in Adelaide, and the Adelaide Hills, of anyone who's driven up there, they're sort of booming. What's the solution to ease congestion on the South Eastern Freeway? And might start with you, if we can, Anne, because I know you're in a continuing campaign about congestion, but also a rail link.
Thank you, Matt, for that. Yes, we have our challenges, but we also have our opportunities. And the growth of Mount Barker has been stemmed by the rezoning of the land in 2010. 1,300 hectares was rezoned. We have 1,200 new residents come into Mount Barker each year, which we're absolutely delighted with. But there's a frustration because of their need to get to the city for employment and also for social activities. Now, at the moment, we've had works on the freeway for some months, and you only need a vehicle accident and you have mayhem, absolute mayhem. And this causes anger and frustration for those that are coming to the city. And the state government must look at this. They were the creators of Mount Barker growing. We need to get all levels of government and all the ministers from around the region, from Finnis to Hammond to Alexandrina, Mayo, Cavell, Hyson, all those ministers together so we can get a solution. And because until we've got the state government on side, we will never be able to get the federal government on side. And that is what we need.
I'll come to the CEO of the Department of Transport in just a moment, but coming to you, Karen, at the other end, of our urban sprawl in Gawler, You were saying earlier that 100 years ago it was faster, the train journey to Gawler from Adelaide was faster than it is now?
Yes.
That was a steam train?
That was a steam train. We don't have the train. It was just, Tony was saying, I bet you can't wait to get that train up and running again. And yes, that's a resounding yes. We also were subject to a ministerial DPA in 2010. So just as Anne rightly said, the state government put this growth agenda together, but where's the support? Where's the infrastructure? And so we've been following Mount Barker's very wise lead. They've done some incredible work in Mount Barker, and we've been the beneficiaries of learning from what they had to do to try and get extra infrastructure. So yes, we're waiting for our train to be electrified. Tony was just saying that it's thrown up all these barriers and all these issues. So that's a really important link, but that's been there for over 100 years. We've got more stations now because the lion's share of population is in the north. The next 25 years of greenfield development will be in the north. So we need to get better at planning our infrastructure. Yes, we've got the Northern Expressway. That's full. I came down there this morning. It's packed. We do need to think outside the square, and I think public transport is the key, but not just one train line into the city. And we need more than that. We need nodes out. We need to think innovatively around how we move people and where the jobs are going to be, because most of the jobs are still in the city. Yes, there's more jobs coming in the north. We've got the submarine contract, whatever that might look like. We've got defence, huge defence jobs. And that's a wonderful thing, as Anne said. There's lots of opportunity, but the infrastructure and support shouldn't be left up to local government.
Tony, if you can just pick up on that in a fearless way, is this the problem we have, particularly with brand new roads? The bigger the road, the people will use them, they fill up very quickly. And do we end up chasing our tail with transport going down that route?
So very much so. In transport, it's a well-known maxim in policy terms that you can't build your way out of congestion. In fact, what happens when you build better roads, you will induce traffic, which will create more congestion. So you need a balanced solution. And the brave conversation that we need to have is making public transport more relevant to the daily commuter around Adelaide. And for that, the public transport network needs to evolve.
But how do we do that? Because, for instance, the government's recently, I wouldn't ask you to criticise the minister because their decision's out of your hands, but the government has recently, for instance, ruled out a rail link from Mount Barker because it's not financially viable, and has had the same argument with the O-Bahn, extending that to Golden Grove.
Well, the important thing to remember is that any public transport mode, you start from a mode agnostic perspective.
What's that mean?
It means you don't pick your mode. You actually think about the movement that's required and the capacity that's required to move between destinations and make journey times between them more competitive. So more competitive with road. So and different modes have different capacities. So the rail line that everyone jumps to is a perfectly suited mode of transport where you need to move up to 20,000 or 20,000 people or more per hour in peak in one direction, because that's what rail has the capacity to do. If you look at the O-Bahn moves 30,000 people per day quite adequately as a bus rapid transit system. And in a city with the urban form that Adelaide has, bus rapid transit is probably more suited to the task of moving the sorts of numbers of people between origin and destination than necessarily rail would be.
So just not enough people for rail?
I would say that public transport planning and land use planning have to go hand in hand. So if we said that we wanted in some point in the future to have significant industry and urban development throughout the Hills District, as they did with the northwest of Sydney, and have 500,000 people live there, and plan that purposely as a growth area, then you could think sensibly about justifying the investment in rail to support that urban growth. But that's effectively taking the population of Adelaide and saying, well, then, let's take another half or so of that and have it residing in that area. So we have to think about the two together. We can't just think about one in isolation of the other.
Daniel Gannon from Property Council, has there been a tendency in South Australia to have your development, like at Mount Barker, Buckland Park, for instance, and then 5 years, 10 years down the track think, oh, we need some public transport for that?
No, I don't think so. And I think the best recent case study closer to town, Matthew, is probably Bowden. And if we look a little further down West Terrace there, with the Coca-Cola development that will come online at some point, you look at where the Channel 7 headquarters currently is, you can see sites like that being earmarked for future residential developments. And right at the front of the doorstep, you've got light rail, you've got a tram network. So I think that with projects like Bowden, that's the case study for mobility closer to town.
You can walk to town from Bowden.
Well, of course you can. You can walk out your front door at Bowden, jump on a train at some point, I'm sure, but right now the tram to get into town. I don't think that transport's been forgotten with developments in the recent past. I think that with the recent trend to move a bit closer to town, the last 5 years we've seen more people trading in their backyards for balconies in the CBD, for example. When that does happen, people are shifting closer to town, which does, of course, lessen the pressure on the bus network or the tram network.
But Rocco, just coming to you then, is technology going to sort of solve this by itself? In other words, is there a role for technology like driverless cars? Well, when I say driverless cars you don't have to necessarily pay too much attention to while you're fanging along. Is that going to help be part of the solution or be part of the problem?
Great question, Matthew. Thank you. And so we've heard a lot about the traditional ways of solving congestion and stuff, build more infrastructure, public transport, some planning and policy decisions and stuff. So I think the technology, intelligent transport systems, their vehicles, intelligent highways are all a part of the solution. There is no silver bullet. We cannot do one thing to solve our future congestion problems. I'm really happy Adelaide as a city, we're growing up and we're getting these problems. We're getting these big city problems now. So how do we plan for that? And I think Tony's in a real bind, actually, as most of departments of transport nationally and internationally are, because we have these new technologies coming online. Autonomous vehicles are coming. We're building infrastructure that's going to be here for 50 years or more. Within that time frame, these new technologies are going to become prevalent in our society. We're going to have autonomous vehicles that will have very small headways, that the current will be able to squeeze 20, 30, 40% more capacity out of our current infrastructure. So why should a Department of Transport build more infrastructure when within the lifetime of the current infrastructure, we're going to see those efficiency gains?
Does that give you nightmares, Tony?
It doesn't give me nightmares, but I actually had the opportunity when I was with New South Wales Government to lead a study in the future of transport technology. And we actually came to the conclusion that it's actually going to be dependent on how customers and consumers respond to the technology. So if everyone kind of sticks with my car is king and the cars go autonomous, then we just have the same as we have today. We're going to have more congestion on the network because people will be able to do more stuff inside their car. So the better answers are in shared mobility and sustainable mobility and the greater use of public transport in any future focused scenario. I mean, Rocco's right. Autonomy could bring us a 20 or 30% uplift in capacity. Even if it doubled the capacity of a high capacity road lane, it's only giving you the ability to move 4,000 people per hour in one lane, compared, as I said, to rail previously, which can move 20,000 on a conventional rail network, up to a autonomous metro can move 40,000. So, still public transport is going to deliver a more efficient solution, a more sustainable solution in the long run, to solve any mobility problem at mass for masses of people. And we need to think of it as more as a means of mass transit.
Do you think we're in Mount Barker, do you think people are just in love with their cars? Like, is it just so much more convenient to hop in your car, you've got your coffee, you've got your CD, or your MP3s playing, whatever, and drive down the freeway and just put up with the odd prang rather than have to stand at a rainy train station and catch a train to Adelaide, if there was a train?
If there was a train.
In other words, are people in love with their cars?
Well, it's been a necessity in the past because there has been no public transport in Mount Barker. There has been very few taxis available, but things are changing. We have Keo Ride now, which is absolutely the best thing that's ever happened to Mount Barker. You've got your app, you dial it up, it comes and picks you up at your front door or just down the street from where you live and delivers you where you need to go. And for $2, people are using that, and the young people are using it, so mum and dad don't have to drive them to school anymore. So it is taking cars off the road. So we're not quite as in love with our cars. I think a lot of people are in love with the type of car they have and they drive, because it's a thing. You know, I drive whatever I drive. But you can get nearly everything in Mount Barker, so the need to go to the city isn't quite what it used to be.
We've got a good question here too from one of you listening and watching at home or at work, from Eliza. What's the impact of work from home, and what can businesses do to bring people back to the city? Daniel Gannon from the Property Council.
Sounds like a Dorothy Dixer. I'm happy to step into this.
Yes, Eliza, Auntie Eliza, or?
Thank you very much. Look, work from home. People were working from home before COVID. So let's not start the conversation thinking that work from home is a new thing that only started last year. There was flexibility before COVID.
It's revved up though.
There'll be flexibility after COVID. So
Yeah.
It has revved up. The question is, will it stay revved up or will it come back down? The Property Council's been tracking occupancy in commercial buildings in capital cities since the outset of the pandemic. If we look at Adelaide at the moment, we're sitting at about 75% occupancy in commercial buildings. So there's that last 25% that's a bit stickier at the moment. So the question is, will they ever come back to town? We'd like to think that they will. That's why we've put in place some recent initiatives like the Go to Town campaign, FOMO Fridays, just to give people more things to do in town, to come back to Fridays, because Fridays is the one day of the week that's been disproportionately impacted because a lot of people are having long weekends at home. And as a direct result, you've got retailers, hospitality providers, cafe and restaurant operators whose bottom lines are taking a massive hit at the moment.
Karen, is a huge incentive in places like Gawler to work from home, even if it wasn't a pandemic? Is this a golden opportunity for some people?
Well, I hear what Daniel's saying, because we want a functioning CBD. However, our main street vacancy rate is now 3%. 3%. It went from 5 to 3 as a result of the pandemic. People, when you're travelling from Gawler, it's an hour each way, if not longer. So it's been transformational for people to work from home. Now, I think there'll be a common sense balance over time, because people will want to engage with their colleagues face to face at certain points. But I think there's a real opportunity for the CBD of Adelaide to really look at other innovative ideas, ramping up residential accommodation, the apartment living, really good quality apartment, not dog box apartment living, so that it really encourages, areas like Bowden is a real success story. So I think that's the future of CBDs, and it allows people to work from home or even have a balance, half time at home, half time in the office, or whatever their role might be. But from a regional point of view, and Gawler is a bit regional, it really has allowed our businesses to survive by having people at home and doing their work in the main street at coffee shops or workspaces, shared workspaces, which are popping up everywhere in the north. So I think that I don't think people will go back full time to travel, because it's just so much better for family life as well. You'd save 2 hours a day. Why would you not want to do that?
You're listening to Fearless Conversations. This is a collaboration between the Advertiser, Sunday Mail, and Transport and Infrastructure, Flinders University. And we're talking transport and infrastructure this morning with our panel. That's Karen Redman, Mayor of Gawler, Professor Rocco Zito from Flinders University, Head of Engineering, Daniel Gannon, SA Executive Director of the Property Council, Tony Braxton-Smith is CEO of the Department for Transport and Infrastructure, and Anne Ferguson is Mayor of Mount Barker District Council. Rocco, if I can come to you, in terms of COVID and work from home or changing patterns, for you as an engineer, but somebody who's had your involvement, your academic and work involvement in GPS technology and all those gizmos, how are you seeing the fearless future?
Interesting. So there's no doubt COVID has had a large impact on universities. We've fundamentally had to change the way we teach our students. Lectures are no longer face-to-face, but the practical tutorials, pracs, civil engineering background, students have to break concrete in the lab. So we still do have that presence. But the balance has absolutely changed. And I think it's up to us as educators now to make the most of that.
Do you think that would be a permanent change?
Yes. Yes, quite simply, yes. The feedback that we've got from the students, the extra flexibility, the modern student isn't like back in my day. So the modern student has many different demands that they're trying to meet. Most of them are working in some capacity or another. They desire this flexibility. So the balance is definitely shifting and changing. I think it's a societal one.
Tony, Braxton-Smith from the Department of Transport Infrastructure, CEO. In terms of COVID, we are seeing big shifts like work from home, but also we're seeing a population shift to South Australia. First time for a long time where we're actually seeing sort of net population growth. People see this quite rightly as a great place to be, but also a safe place to be. Safer, certainly. How does the department factor that in? What sort of projections, or is it too early to do projections on those sorts of things?
I think it's too early to do long-term modelling and projections on a quantitative basis, but there's certainly lots of positive signals and indicators. So, for instance, as Anne said, I think it's an opportunity for Adelaide to move beyond being just all about the CBD to being much more of a polycentric city where we do have centres like Gawler, Elizabeth, Seaford, Marion, but other kind of sub-centres around the city that become community hubs and people spend more time closer to home. So one of the futures that we looked at in our technology transport study was particularly this, where people stay close to home, not only because of what's happening in terms of work at home, but e-learning, e-health and home delivery. So there's a whole lot of driving factors there that kind of push back towards local communities, thriving local communities, and that will change the nature of the use of the network in the future. And what we might see is more localised travel, but much more use for freight movements and service movements as people kind of stay more in their village.
So do we need the South Road tunnels then?
Oh, absolutely, we need that. So it is, for Adelaide, the economic artery. If you look along that artery, then there are 4 or 5 of the growth sectors for this economy that are highly dependent upon the efficiency of movement through that corridor. And right now, around Adelaide, around 16% of daily journeys are impacted in some way or another by the section between Torrens and Darlington. Not only movements north-south, but because we have to optimise the signals for north-south movements east-west are also impacted. So the real value in that is unlocking economic activity and making it a much more efficient prospect for people to get to jobs, for goods and services to get from production to market, but it also optimises all of the east-west movement.
We'll extend that because you'll have this, hopefully, with the tunnels, this beautiful so-called non-stop corridor, and then we've got the South Eastern Freeway. And what thought do you think needs to be given to linking the South Eastern Freeway traffic, particularly trucks, to the north-south corridor?
Well, it's a long-term problem, and it's a problem to be solved. I would say step one is to look at, particularly for interstate or long-distance freight movements, diversion off the freeway and around the back of Adelaide, which is what the Globelink study told us, and what we're now doing with starting to look at the bypass. Second, I do think that higher quality public transport that provides more journey to work capacity along the South Eastern Freeway is also part of the equation. And then we have to make some trade-off decisions about how much we sweat at the existing assets versus what the longer-term solution might be, but tempering our view by what Rocco mentioned in terms of there could be new technologies that come along that actually do enable us to get more out of the assets. So we we need to kind of hold our breath a little bit on this one.
I'll bounce that off you in a moment, Anne, but just quickly, when you talk about that, so Crossroad is not going to be some sort of de facto sort of Band-Aid solution to link the South Eastern Freeway to the North-South corridor.
There is no defined corridor. When you get to the bottom of the freeway, it's a distributed network.
It's a mess.
It's a distributed it's a network that's under pressure.
Yeah.
And it's actually the part of the journey to work that's under more pressure than actually the freeway itself on a day-by-day basis. But again, we need to see what we can do to get more out of our existing assets whilst we complete the investment and look what happens over the course of the next 5 or 10 years before jumping to a solution there.
Okay, Anne,
Well, the bottom of the freeway is an accident waiting to happen, as it's been demonstrated. We don't want any more lives lost because we know there is a problem. The government knows there is a problem. It needs to be looking at a solution now, not in 5 years' time, not in 10 years' time, because a life is a part of somebody's family.
So Anne's talking about a different problem, which is the bottom of the freeway, which I agree, and we are working on at the moment, what our options are for that intersection. I'm talking about the connection, potential connections to the north-south corridor. I absolutely share the sentiment. We need to reduce the impact of crashes on lives lost and injuries.
I suppose what we're saying is you either get somehow trucks onto the north-south corridor, and there's no way of doing that slickly down Crossroad or Portrush Road, or you do have a route around the hills, the back. And is that still alive? I thought Globelink had been knocked out. It wasn't.
Well, Globelink was the concept of a completely separate new built corridor for both road and rail.
Right.
What the study said was that it was economically, the economic benefits were minimal in comparison to the costs, and that what we should do is look at upgrading our existing infrastructure. So a connection from around Murray Bridge across to somewhere near Truro, using, I think it's called Halfway House Road, upgrading Truro bypass and then connecting it across through to the Port Wakefield,
so that's
Augusta Highway corridor.
That's actively being looked at now.
We've spent some money initially on that north-south road. There was $12 million spent in stimulus money. There's more coming. Truro bypass is being upgraded, and we've got now a funded study to examine that as a long-term corridor for freight movement across the state.
And is that good news?
Regional Development Australia and Southern Hills Local Government Association have been working with this. There is a report about to be released which supports the bypass, and that is a great solution. And don't tell me it's going to cost too much, because it is paramount that we get freight off the freeway for safety.
Rocco, so we'll come back to Tony in a moment. Rocco, in terms of an engineering solution to that, just running big trucks, on whatever roads, do we need to be building smart roads if we're going to have that sort of long-term link to keep the trucks, a large percentage of trucks out of Adelaide metropolitan area? Are we going to need to future-proof some roads so that you can run driverless trucks?
That's right, yeah.
Almost like trains with rubber wheels.
Yeah, yes. So I think the next generation of safety technologies are actually going to be outside the vehicle. So it's going to be road infrastructure, talking to vehicles, warning them of incidents down the bottom of freeways, getting drivers or computer systems to slow down and get those enhanced safety systems that we haven't seen yet.
And you talked about students being just a different generation of students. Are we seeing generations of drivers who are I'm not saying you're old, but are we seeing generations of drivers who are a lot more comfortable with technology?
Are we seeing generations of drivers?
A generation, yeah.
No, are we seeing a generation? Is the next generation, are they going to be drivers? The anecdote I always put forward is ask either one of my sons, what would you rather lose, your driver's license or your phone? Why do I need my driver's license for? I'll just get an Uber with my phone. Connectivity is much, much more important to the up-and-coming generations than having a driver's license. So what does that mean about transport? Where transport's undergoing a lot of disruption at the moment. There's technology, societal changes, expectations from this younger generation on what future transport is going to look like. And we don't know the answer yet.
Daniel Gannon, your thoughts on really not a zombie of Globelink, but sort of Globelink Mark II perhaps, maybe a smarter solution, a cheaper solution?
Look, I mean, I guess there has been this conversation that goes back a long time now about light rail networks and things like value capture. The view that we've always taken on transport, Matthew, is the impact that it has on property prices in particular. Naturally, we would defer to the transport experts when it comes to Globelink 2.0 or whatever that might be to defer congestion off the freeway. As an old Adelaide Hills boy, I still remember Devil's Elbow and the original freeway. So I actually think that what's there at the moment is a massive improvement from what I started using a long time ago. But I'll leave that to the transport.
Yes, I have memories of the old Wolseley's radiator boiling halfway up the whole road. Rocco, I might bounce back to you because thanks to Mark for this question. And you can fire questions in on Twitter at #FearlessConversations. Do the panellists see a future where car ownership diminishes and people can dial up an autonomous vehicle or hire one from a pool by the day? And you said that's starting to happen in Mount Barker.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And Rocco.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I see it as transport. I think it's what the next generation of people that require mobility. I won't call them drivers. They're going to have a plethora of mobility options available to them. So it will be public transport, it will be private car, it will be shared rides, and it will be up to the user to choose which one's most appropriate for them now. In the future, if you want to jump in your private car, that's fine, but there might be some extra charges associated with that compared to driving into some shared mobility compared to using public transport.
Tony, I think you wanted to pick up on something when we're talking about basically the two issues of the South Eastern Freeway and heavy transport there. That Anne was talking about the human cost of lives down at that intersection.
The cost generally. So in terms of the cost, engineers given enough money will find a solution to anything. Economists need to do the analysis that say what are the actual net economic benefits, and out of that, advice is provided to government, elected officials, for them to make decisions. So innately, leveraging the existing infrastructure will give us a much more cost-effective solution. We're calling it the Great Estate freight bypass, for want of a better term at the moment. But there are economic benefits more broadly to the state in being able to use that, to build that infrastructure, because it will take higher productivity vehicles. So at the moment, there are restrictions on the size of vehicle you can take down the freeway and through the CBD. And I don't think anyone wants, or through the urban areas, and no one wants the growth in that. So, the right incentive is to build bypasses that allow higher productivity vehicles, be triples, to be able to operate across the state. And that will drive then, with an economic incentive, a change in the vehicle owners' behaviours, irrespective of whether they're automated or not. And automated trucks are particularly being trialled, I think, in Sweden at the moment. But there are some early trials, and if you think about how the technology gets introduced, there's already automated trucks in the mining industry. You could foresee that might flow on to heavy vehicles because of the economic benefits, and then flow down from there. So that's one of the possibilities of how we see autonomy arising, as opposed to necessarily being led by our own cars.
Karen, as Mayor of Gawler, I know the Property Council, state governments and the building industry love new developments, greenfield developments. We've seen a lot of them up north. Yeah. Are councils always playing sort of catch up in terms of sewerage, roads, electricity, schools, shopping centres?
Yeah.
In other words, does that come after the announcement, after the big announcement and the politicians throwing a shovel of dirt?
Well, I think that's right. I think certainly developments have become much more sophisticated, and Daniel would, I think would agree with master planned communities. Infrastructure charges that pay for community infrastructure and those essential services is flawed, in my humble opinion. It is reliant on developers paying separate rates, etc. We need to get better. We need to have more innovative ways of paying for the infrastructure that's required to have strong communities. So, like Mount Barker, Gawler had a ministerial DPA, and the only thing that created the Gawler East Link Road was a 1,000 lot trigger. That was it. And there was no infrastructure deeds, there was no infrastructure charge, no separate rate. That all came later. And lots of arguments, lots of discussion, lots of upset people, which could have been avoided. Mount Barker had the same thing. Now, we learnt a lot from Mount Barker because they sorted a lot of that out before we came on board, but it can be done better. So we need a better system. I had a conversation with Michael Lennon a couple of years ago when he was here, and he agreed. He said we need to get better at how we bring in our trunk infrastructure. You know, we've got Roseworthy going ahead now, and they're only now doing trunk infrastructure through Gawler to connect up so Roseworthy can survive. You know, there's still no train out there. You know, so you do play catch up, and I think that, you know, a fearless conversation should be around how do we plan better for our communities so that we can do these community hubs, so that people can live, work and play in their communities and be happy. Why should we not want that? So yes, I think we can do better.
Daniel, would you agree?
No, look, if the answer is more taxes for the property industry or developers, then I think we're asking the wrong question. And then there's actually a really important question for the role that councils play across South Australia. There was a story in the Advertiser earlier this week by Miles Kemp that looked at the disproportionate levels of council rates that differing councils are charging for their ratepayers. But I don't think the answer is as simple as let's charge developers more so only they deliver the community infrastructure that people need.
Or is the answer that ratepayers have to pay more? Is that when you're looking at the differentials between council rates?
Well, to Karen's point, I mean, I think that we've got to... we need to determine what infrastructure local communities need,
right.
first and foremost.
I don't disagree with Daniel. I think that there has to be a better system, and currently it's the developer and the ratepayer that pays. And so and then councils have to go into a competitive grant system, which is flawed, to try and get money to pay for essential infrastructure, things like libraries, things like, you know, even schools come late in the piece. That changes. You don't always have any say on where your school is developed. So, for example, Gawler and District College became a super school soon after the ministerial DPA to put a shopping centre in front of the school, 1,400 kids, new shopping centre, all in the one spot. I'll show you just what a dog's breakfast it is. Great school, great
shopping centre.
Great shopping centre, all together, no planning, and the planning came after. So we can do better. We can do better than that. And I think that state and federal government get a free kick when it comes to developments, I think. So I don't disagree with you, Daniel, that there's a better...
This is an historic moment then.
It's unexpected.
I disagree with you.
It's unexpected.
But there needs to be... I think the cost needs to be shared more equitably because it comes down to the ratepayer, it comes down to... The developer gets an uplift. I don't think it's unreasonable for a developer to pay. But every year, there's an argument around that, and we can do better than that.
I thought I was being fearless, but it turns out I was being quite beige.
Right. Never. I don't think we can say that about any of our panellists today here on Fearless Conversations. I'd just like to change gears if we can and pick up on a personal bugbear. And Adelaide was meant to be once was a 20-minute city, but really we're the 15, 25, 40k an hour, 60, back to 20, 40 city with roadworks. And it is, if you ask, well, anyone I talk to about it, it drives people absolutely nuts. Rocco, is there a better way for us to use leverage technology so that we don't have this constant frustration in terms of delays on our roads?
Maintenance and upkeep of infrastructure is going to be with us forever. Infrastructure needs to be maintained. Those roadworks aren't there because they're not necessary. They're absolutely required to keep the safety standards going. And it's a great question because the next phase of our autonomous vehicle trials are going to be precisely that. How do the modern day vehicles, how does my autonomous bus talk to infrastructure? Part of that talking to the infrastructure is about roadworks. We'll get warnings about roadworks that are coming up, that are happening, where they are, the best way to avoid them, how to get around them. There are absolutely technological solutions for there. But so I think in the future, part of this new infrastructure that we're going to build is going to need to have communications, connected technologies, and we have that technology at the moment. In fact, there are some companies here in South Australia that are leading that can really help with the maintenance, those roadwork issues.
Tony, and despite the technology being available, we do just run into the people with the lollipop sticks, the traffic cones all over Adelaide, and it seems to me that while we spend vast amounts of money on great projects, great road projects, our roads are choked with roadworks.
Well, I was reflecting that probably the pain point has moved because what we've seen in terms of maintenance is the maintenance backlog in the road network in this state has grown over the last 20 years to $750 million of maintenance backlog as it was back in 2018 when it was last actually measured. Now, I would hazard a guess at the time people were complaining that more work needed to be done to fix up the roads. Now, by virtue of stimulus and by virtue of quite a step up in the investment programs, a lot more work is being done. So now the pain is shifting from why can't you fix the road up to, boy, I'm being disrupted while this road is being fixed up. There is a better, brighter future. Once you do that work, it's generally good for 20 to 50 years. So put it in proportion. It's necessary and it's unavoidable. Could we find better technology solutions to communicate better with customers? Absolutely. And that's something we need to now turn our minds to and have a look at.
Is anyone actually doing that though?
We've got a team that's kind of turning their mind to, thinking about, well, how do we communicate better? And part of it's got to be about a kind of a better understanding in the community. For instance, when we finish a road, in inverted commas, and open it to traffic, we actually need to allow the road surface a period of time to cure and harden. So it doesn't have the skid resistance. So we need to keep road speed low during that period. And often we're criticised for, well, the road's finished and why can't they take the speed limit off? Well, there's a very good engineering reason. So as much as we're trying to deliver a benefit, it's being seen as an impediment. So there's a little bit of education and understanding, but there's definitely a technology solution and a communications task there that we could do better at.
I know you've got mayors on each side of you. However, does the Transport Department sometimes find itself, in terms of traffic flow, handcuffed by councils doing their own thing? And I'll give you an example of most councils seem to concentrating on making roads narrower, roads like King William Road and Prospect Road, for instance, turning them into boutique shopping strips when their primary purpose should be shifting lots of cars at peak hour.
Well, particularly in road planning terms, there's a new and evolving model that Infrastructure Australia has just been very explicit about called place and movement. So when you look at a road, you need to think not just about its function for its movement, but the character of the urban environment that it moves through. So I'm not going to opine on one particular road because we haven't got the assessment in front of us, but we do need that balance. We are in the present time doing corridor studies in certain areas and sitting with council to try and understand how their local traffic movement would articulate with what our analysis and thinking is for the corridor. We, I would say, work pretty well with councils, but we could work better. But we do talk to each other quite frequently about our challenges, and we both kind of face the shared issue, which is there is more work to be done than funds available.
Let's go to the Riverbank Arena. $670 million. I've written recently in the Sunday Mail that 81% of people in one survey think they'd rather the money spent on health. That is Labor Party's policy. We don't have to get into the partisan politics of it here. But could that money be spent better? That's a lot of money. Daniel Gannon.
I feel like the question's coming my way. Look,
that one is.
Broadly speaking, this is actually the perfect type of social infrastructure that should be built. Schools, hospitals, convention centres, like this, because of course, don't forget, this is effectively stage 3 of the convention centre. And convention centres do...
So it's not a basketball court?
Well, it's 3 things. It's conventions, it's court sports, and it's concerts. So it's more than a basketball stadium. We are now about to trounce into the political arena there, Matthew, but it's $660-ish million. In terms of construction, there's about 4,500 jobs during the construction phase. The business case was released 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that tells us there'd be about 830,000 tourists that would flock through that particular arena every year. When we look at a convention like Land Forces, which Adelaide hosted only 3 years ago, there were 15,000 delegates that came to Adelaide, 25,000 bed nights, $34 million was injected into the economy on the back of one event alone, one convention alone. So productive infrastructure like this needs to be built. And we can't just stop building things like this because of COVID or because of health pandemics. Governments will always continue to spend big bucks on health, and the state government is of course doing that. But we shouldn't push a pause button on this particular project because of the politics. We've got to get on with it and do it.
And Ferguson, as Mayor of Mount Barker,
Well,
what's it like when you look down on the hills and you see arenas being built for nearly $1 billion?
fantastic. Because it's not just about Mount Barker. This is about the state of South Australia. We want to be known as a really forward progressive state. And you can't just look at one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. You've got to look at Adelaide as a destination. People come into Adelaide and then they go out into the regions. And that is vital. But their stop in Adelaide must be memorable. And it doesn't matter if it is not spent at Mount Barker. As long as some is spent in the regions, Adelaide is the destination to start from. And anything along the riverbank is great. You go to Brisbane, you go to Melbourne, and they've got it. We need it.
Rocco, why would you go to an arena in the city and all the hassle of catching a bus or something in there when you can have your gee whiz computers at home, watch the event in surround sound? You can see I don't have any of that, but anyway.
I think it's what I mentioned before. It's just part of Adelaide growing up as a city. Any major city that you go to, absolutely, there's the entertainment and arenas are based in that city centre and stuff. So, yes, it does have to compete with education and health, and their arguments are always quite strong. But it's probably a political argument. Getting that balance is up to politicians and the like.
That's city infrastructure. In terms of regional infrastructure, Karen, what's your wish list?
Oh, it's endless. I don't agree with the arena. There's actually another argument, and that's about the obesity epidemic in young children. And we've got elite sport, which is great. Everyone loves going to watch, but it's exclusive because most people can't afford to actually go and get a ticket and watch. But that's good from a destination point of view. But then you've got community sport, which is crying out for money. We have recreation centres, football club rooms, netball courts that are over 60 years old. And one of our netball courts, our association courts, don't even come up to code. They can't get any decent netball games there because they don't come up to code. It's going to cost $4 million just to fix that. There's a whole list. The regions are crying out for some money for community sport and recreation to try and get their kids to play sport and to be affordable. And yet we're going to spend $600 million on an arena, and I just don't agree.
Tony, Braxton-Smith, the Transport Department, in terms of the pool of money you've got, and all these competing sort of interests, in terms of regional roads particularly, and important, a lot of lives are lost on regional roads. I know money is being spent to fix that in terms of shoulder, increasing shoulder works and so on. But these unlocking tourism potential particularly, things like the Victor Harbour, duplicating a road to Victor Harbour, where is that on our list of priorities and where should it be?
Well, more broadly, the state's identified 9 economic growth sectors, of which tourism is one, agribusiness and a whole bundle of others are also on the list. And there are some that are dependent on road infrastructure. What we're seeking to do is to better understand supply chains and be able to provide advice to government as to where investments in road infrastructure actually provide most economic benefit to the state. Tourism clearly is going to reorientate next year and the year after. I was actually reflecting earlier this year, I was talking to my counterpart in Queensland. He said that actually he was seeing more movements between Brisbane and Adelaide than between Brisbane and Cairns. Such was the popularity of Adelaide as a destination, and I would hazard a guess when borders open up, that will endure. So the more that we can do to make ourselves a magnet city, it will have a flow-on effect to regions, because while they're here, they will go out into the regions, particularly with the great road infrastructure we've now got, where you can get to the valleys or anywhere, for a day trip within an hour. So I think we're already well on the way. But our advice to government's got to be kind of sharp on where the greatest economic opportunity lies in investment in road infrastructure. And as far as regional roads are concerned, absolutely the safety benefit comes along with it. It is unfortunate that the fatality rate on regional roads is about 5 times the fatality rate on our suburban road network. And that's something that we do have to address and is being addressed through a lot of safety stimulus investment that's now flowing.
Do you find it incredible there's no commuter train to Murray Bridge? I know we've talked about Mount Barker, but Murray Bridge surely has got great potential as a satellite city of Adelaide, proper one. It's sort of quasi one at the moment. There's a rail line that runs through it for the interstate train, passenger train and freight, but no commuter train to Adelaide.
Well, I go
unless I've missed the bus.
As I go back to what I said before, which is that in terms of transport solutions, we need to be a little bit mode agnostic. Yes, there is an existing rail line, but it was built in the 1870s, I think, when the overland first came from Melbourne. I think that happened in the 1880s, and it follows an alignment that is built for 19th century technology. 21st century technology will not be able to travel at competitive travel times on that alignment. Whether it's to Mount Barker or Murray Bridge, you will always be able to get there faster on the road than you would on the existing rail alignment. So, and again...
So rather than a fast train, we've got a super slow train to Murray Bridge.
Well,
or we don't have a train to Murray Bridge.
Unless we have a vision for a different future of Murray Bridge, which envisages lots of industrial development and lots of day-round two-way flows for mass transit solutions, we're going to be looking at other forms to meet the transport task.
Daniel Gannon, what do you think about having, a satellite city as Murray Bridge?
Look, to be honest, I haven't thought much about Murray Bridge for a long time, up until I went to Gifford Hill, the new racecourse up at Murray Bridge 2 or 3 weeks ago. That's got to be one of the greatest horse racing facilities in the country in terms of community facilities. But also up until recently, Matthew, you couldn't hail an Uber, I think, from anywhere deeper than Bridgewater in the hills. That's now caught up. To be honest, now having been to Murray Bridge and then travelled into town after the races, and I went to this great hotel for a drink after the races, the infrastructure up there has changed a lot. It's strengthened. There's a lot more reasons to go there now. But does that mean that we should lay tracks for a train? Probably not. I mean, it's a funding priority for state governments. But I've got to say, Murray Bridge in my mind has now changed. Wonderful racing experience up there, care of Kim Burke and his companies helped transform Murray Bridge.
Okay. Karen, you've got a rail line
I do.
being upgraded there, and there's been some controversy over that as well in terms of the COVID workforce, in terms of getting people here, I know. Is that something that the people of Gawler say, yeah, we need an electrified railway line here? Do you think it's going to make it much difference? Is it going to be a game changer for Gawler?
Gawler's always had the train line, and it's been critical to move people. The electrified line will be cleaner and greener, so you won't breathe in diesel smoke, which is good for your health. So from that point alone, it's a major improvement. that line is critical. I think it's the busiest line, even though it's probably taken quite a long time to do, but it is a complex line to fix up. People from the north of Gawler use the Gawler line because that's the only rail node into the city. So it's a major catch point for people coming from Clare, from the Barossa Valley, etc. So it is important. It will save, Tony will be able to tell you exactly how many seconds and minutes it will save, but it will only be one option. And I think that more efficient public transport, smaller boutique, whether it's shared rides, whether it's autonomous buses, whether it's electric buses, it has to be green and clean, I think, in the future. But there is a lot of opportunity to move smaller groups of people around so that it's more nimble, because I think currently it's quite clunky out north. Tony, I think, wouldn't disagree. You know, the bus service is pretty ordinary. It's okay, but most people don't use it because it's easier to catch to drive your car. So until we get to the point where it's actually easier and more efficient to catch public transport, that's when we grow up. We're not there yet, but I think there's real opportunity, as Anne was talking about the shared ride service in Mount Barker. That's the future. Smaller groups of people choosing to get around so they don't have to have a car. At the moment, you need 2 cars. You know, you can't. In Gawler, we're 42 k's from the city, so you can't move without having a car, in my humble view. So I think we're halfway there. Once we get the electrified train, then improve the public transport, other options, because it does require more flexible options than just a train line.
Rocco, as an engineer who teaches engineers, what's your biggest bugbear? You know, we talk about fearless conversations, but you must look at some of our transport options or some of our infrastructure options and think, why are we doing it like that? Is there a better way?
Thank you, Matthew. You've opened up a can of worms. And of course, on the engineering side, I think Tony mentioned it before, an engineer will engineer a solution. There are many, many different types of solutions that can be engineered for various problems. So, but actually, to be honest, I probably wouldn't want to live in a society where every solution was engineered, because what would that mean for hospitals, education, and all the social services and the like. So I think what I'd like to see is, and that this is what we're teaching our students. You know, we just don't dig holes and fill them in with concrete because we like doing that. They actually serve a purpose. And getting that purpose right, getting the priorities right and stuff, actually goes beyond an engineering solution.
Okay. Do we have that balance now?
Kind of.
Kind of.
I don't think we'd be having this fearless conversation if we had the balance absolutely right. We'd all be just patting each other on the back and supporting ourselves. So
we're almost running up to the end of the clock here, but I'll just quickly pick up on that with our panellists. Daniel, what drives you nuts? What's something you'd really like us to be more fearless about in Adelaide, in South Australia?
Just embracing growth as a mindset, to be honest. I think the easy thing in a post-pandemic environment will be to look at population growth and get scared by it, because that might lead to increased densification of suburbs or of CBDs in a residential sense. I think that we need to embrace our great status as Australia's most livable city. I think we've got to embrace that and attract more businesses, attract more people. We've got a great opportunity moving forward to essentially be a bit of a Zoom city, maybe the world's first Zoom city, where you can hold a job in Sydney but work from an office in Adelaide and do it. And of course that means buying a house here, raising your family here, and contributing to the taxation revenue of South Australia.
And Ferguson.
Well,
your fearless wish.
We have growth. We have 15 developments as we speak. So growth is something that we've embraced, and we're trying to get the very best outcome for South Australia. And through our land tax, we are holding up South Australia because of our development. So we would like to see more support from state and federal government for infrastructure for our community.
Tony, your chance to be fearless here.
I would call for better integrated public transport solutions that look forward to where communities are developing and how people move now, so that we make it more relevant between public transport, active transport and shared transport for daily use in the way that people get around between work and home.
Karen Redman, you get the last word here.
I get the
Mayor of
last
Gawler.
word. Well, everything they said, but I think growth without compromising on quality. So maintaining our livable city status so that we get town character, we get quality growth, not just growth at any cost, but quality growth. And that, as Anne said, feeding into, support from state and federal government. So instead of them wiping their hands and going, that's your problem, that's the property sector's problem, that's council's problem, that's the humble ratepayer's problem, let's all do this together so that quality is not compromised.
Thank you, Karen. And I think we'll wrap up there. Our fearless conversations. I never did get round to asking you about boat ramps, Tony, but we'll have a private fearless conversation maybe about that one.
On a tinny.
So thank you for joining us, and keep the conversation going. Use hashtag fearless conversations on Twitter, and you can go to adelaidenow.com.au/fearless conversations, and look forward to next week's fearless conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Matt.